Conquer the Noise is a podcast produced by Unconquered, an independent agency challenging brand perspective through redefined content. This podcast is dedicated to telling stories of outstanding ideas and people who have found their way amongst the chatter.
Hey everybody, we have a great show today. Thank you so much for joining us. We have Hannah Skvarla, the co-founder of The Little Market, as well as Liesl Gerntholtz, who is the chief program officer. The Little Market is a nonprofit fair trade shop featuring ethically sourced, artisan-made products. They're committed to upholding the dignity of artisans, celebrating their cultural techniques and traditions while bringing attention to human rights issues.
So thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Liesel, for coming on today. I really appreciate you making the time. How are both of you?
Good. Well, hot and sticky in New York, but good nevertheless.
And Hannah, how are you?
I'm good. I can't complain. The LA weather is very nice right now.
I know. I'm always so jealous. From when I lived in LA, I still have the weather app on LA, and I see every time I open just sunshine all the way down. I'm like, why am I in sticky hot New York like Liesel just described it? So the both of you are working at the Little Market. Hannah, you founded the Little Market. I'm really curious to how you arrived at the place and time in your life when you decided to create it.
Yeah, so I co-founded the Little Market with Lauren Conrad in 2013. That's when the doors opened, but it was an idea long before that. I was very fortunate to grow up in a family that was really committed to giving back with a focus on social justice and human rights. And because of that, I was introduced to incredible organizations like Human Rights Watch that were all about investigating and exposing human rights abuses and raising awareness for those to create change. And I had the opportunity to both travel and volunteer with the organization, and I learned so much about how the best nonprofits in the world run and operate, and what it takes to get the general public to care about a cause that might not impact them. Things like the Rwandan genocide. Those were things that Human Rights Watch was actually the first organization to ever report on. Mm-hmm. And around that same time, when I was finishing up, I went to FITM, the Fashion Institute that's here in LA, and that's where I met Lauren Conrad. And we realized we had a lot of shared interests. And when I would talk to her about the work Human Rights Watch was doing and about the human rights abuses I would learn about, she said, please tell me how I can get involved. I'd love to go on one of these trips with you. Can we schedule, find a way for me to learn more, see it for myself, and then find a unique way to give back. So we planned a 2-week trip to visit nonprofits. We wanted to see their work on the ground. She wanted to see it for herself, meet the people. And on that trip, the idea was to be able to find a way to give back to women and children, because that was, two areas that we really cared about. And we met with incredible nonprofits doing all sorts of things from, education to helping to support farm work. I mean, there's so much need globally. During that trip, the women we would meet would share over and over again how they really, that the charities that they were working with were so essential. But what they really wanted was the opportunity to support themselves and their families. Unfortunately, there's so few dignified work opportunities globally, especially for women. But we also were noticing that in almost all of these communities, there were beautiful handmade goods. And many of these handmade goods had been, the techniques had been passed down from generation to generation. They were such special pieces that oftentimes you could only find that one design in this one community. And there was so much meaning behind it, and there was so much pride in creating these products. And what we realized was oftentimes the women, the artisans, were just missing a way to reach a bigger marketplace. And so Lauren wanted to be able, that was like a very unique way that she could give back, is to use her platform and her design experience and her brand experience to help create an online marketplace that would connect artisans from every corner of the globe to customers that cared about purchasing ethically made products. And this all ties back to how I met Liesel, because Liesel spent a long time at Human Rights Watch. I will let her tell you more about that. But, really from the Little Markets Foundation, we use that Human Rights Watch as the gold standard. In terms of, we always wanted to make sure that everything we do, we were doing, we were always putting artisans before product, for product arrival timelines, before profit, all of these things, like everything we've done at the Little Market puts the artisan and the maker first. So that means things like sometimes product arrives a year later than we think it's going to, and that's okay. We've really changed the way we run this organization to make sure that we're always doing, making as much good impact as possible. So Liesl, I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks, Hannah. So I met Hannah, she said, when I was at Human Rights Watch and she was volunteering in the LA office. And I was able to watch this idea sort of grow from a tiny website that had a handful of products to opening a brick-and-mortar store in Pacific Palisades to where we are now, where we have just hit a milestone that over 7 years, we've provided 1 million hours of dignified work, mainly to women. We bought around 115,000 products last year. We have worked with around 1,200 women. So it's really grown exponentially over the 7 years. And what sets us apart, and the part that I really love and am deeply invested in, is that we really try to reach out to the groups who are most marginalized. So we're really investing in trying to figure out, what are the groups who don't have access to the internet, to an e-commerce platform, who won't easily find us? How do we find them? And then work with them to be able to bring their products to market, to put them on our website and so on. But, at the heart of, as Hannah says, at the heart of what we're doing is really this idea that giving women, mainly women, money directly, appropriately valuing their products, how much it costs for them to really make these products, is where real empowerment lies. That's, in my opinion, after doing this work for a really long time, is what is going to change the world.
Now, I want to go back to something that you said, Hannah, and you were talking about how you were working with charities before and seeing how some of them were optimally run. And I get the vibe that Little Market really isn't necessarily a charity. When you think of charity, you think of just giving something away. It's there's less of that relationship building and creating a marketplace to help. I guess goes back to the old idea of teaching someone to fish to create their own food, right? Versus just giving them a fish.
It's so funny you use that example because that's literally what Lauren referenced when we were on this trip. Is there's and we were actually just talking about this the other day, and how in so many ways Little Market's actually just providing a place to sell that fish. There's incredible things being handmade globally. And so often it's just the missing link is the access to a marketplace or, simple design feedback. I always give the example that a placemat in Guatemala is going to be a different size placemat than it is here in the US. So if we just change the dimensions and maybe change some colors based on seasonal trends here in the US, then it's going to we'll be able to sell a lot more placemats for that artisan. So those are the types of small changes that really help get that product to marketplace and help to create a sustainable income, because our goal is to be able to place recurring orders with these groups so they can also grow the size of their teams and know that they can rely on us to come back for more orders every season.
No, I think so. Both of you touched on this idea of dignified work and a living wage, and I think if anything to have that conversation right now is if there's any time to have that conversation is right now, especially one because I think at least in the U.S. economy, we're seeing it being talked about a lot as far as having the difficulty people coming back to work. There's hesitancy going to work for below minimum wage or minimum wage. Can people survive off that? So I think in this context, I would love to hear you speak to what dignified work is, and what that means, and a living wage and so forth.
Well, I'm going to definitely let Liesl take this, but I also realized Liesl did not have a chance to give you her background, which is so key to why she is an expert at this. I think we were inspired by so much of the work she had done when we started the Little Market, but she has really helped us to articulate all of that so much better and articulate the impact.
As you can see, Jonathan, Hannah and I are big fans of each other. That makes it really fun to work with Little Market. Was this is connected to the idea of dignified work, because for us, we're also trying to create a team at the little market where we provide dignified work to our staff. So, we really connect what we're putting out in the world with what we're doing internally, because I think often one of the problems, particularly in the nonprofit, but not only, is there's this disconnect between the external values and the change you want to make in the world and then what is happening internally. So I think we really vision around dignified work that is not just about how we work with artisans, but it's also around how we work with our own team. And I think there's a particularly gendered focus towards that, because I think one of the things you're saying, there could not be a more important time to be thinking about the quality of work, how people are paid for work, the autonomy that people have over their working lives. Because I think one of the things that COVID has really pulled the curtain back on is how many people in the richest country in the world are working 2 or 3 jobs and still cannot pay for basic essentials. And that's how we define a living wage. We define a living wage as the ability of families. So a living wage is not an individual wage, it's a family wage. So how families are able to pay for the essentials, send their kids to school, make sure that no one's going to bed hungry, able to pay rent, and then able to have some discretionary savings, if something goes wrong. And what we see is that the quality of jobs that people have in this country and all over the world don't allow them to do that. And they're working longer hours, and they are simply not able to support themselves and their family. So one of the things that we work with artisan groups to do is to figure out in a fair amount of detail and specificity how long it takes to make a product. So we know, for example, that our candles, which are made in this country by resettled refugees, takes about 6 hours to make a handmade candle. And so figuring out then what a living wage looks like, because living wages are also contextual. The living wage in Dakar is very different to the one in New York. But once we are able to really figure out sort of how long it takes to make it, and then factor in the costs of wages, factor in sort of what a cost of living is in a particular place. So we develop what we call living wage guidance for all of the countries that we work in. And then we make sure that the groups we're working with, especially where we're not working directly with artisans, but we're working with the leadership of a group, we really go into quite a lot of depth to make sure we understand the structure, who's making decisions, how are people being paid, when do they get paid, what are the conditions under which they're making products. But for me, where I find the real value to this work is that I really do believe is that if you don't empower women economically, so if women can't earn money, decide how to spend it, and know that they're earning their money in ways that don't endanger their health or their lives, because we know that, workplace violence is a real issue. We know that women often make products in really unsafe spaces. If we don't change that, the other work we're doing around access to education and improvements in reproductive health care, all of that, I think, is predicated on the idea that women are able to be economically self-sufficient and economically independent. And that's part of what the little market is doing. And that's why dignified work, and that's our primary measure. That's what we measure every year, is how many hours of dignified work have we provided. That's why we're so focused on that as a measurement and as a way to make impact.
So your background before this really did set you up to be an expert in this field, and I've really enjoyed just our conversations before the podcast because the wealth of knowledge. You had a long career at the Human Rights Watch. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you focused on and how you found this passion and higher purpose of yours?
I'm always interested when people say that, in terms, because I feel like I have gotten as much, if not more, than I've ever put into this job that I've had. It has been, for me, a real gift to be able to have a job that I love, that is intellectually satisfying, but that is very purposeful for me. So I worked at Human Rights Watch for about 12 years. I was mainly the director of the Women's Rights Division. I had other roles, but this was sort of my most important one. But before then, I grew up in South Africa under apartheid, and I'm going to apologize so anyone tuning in New York will recognize the siren.
It's quite all right.
It's the soundtrack to our lives in New York often. So I grew up in apartheid South Africa, and there, I think for me, just the starkness of discrimination. It's really formative for me because I grew up in a segregated country, and then I became sort of a working adult in this new democracy under Nelson Mandela, where, you know, the whole world was looking at South Africa and trying to sort of understand what it meant that there'd been this peaceful transition, that we were led by this man who seemingly had this kind of innate ability to sort of prize human rights and dignity and equality for everybody. And so those two experiences, I think, were really formative for me. And what I think took me to the little market was really, I think, this understanding. I started out working on violence against women, and then that connected to HIV. So I worked in South Africa when there was a massive HIV epidemic. South Africa was really at the epicenter of that epidemic. And, you know, the thread that connects all these violations is really the lack of economic empowerment and the lack of economic independence and self-sufficiency, because the things that make women vulnerable to HIV infection, the things that make girls vulnerable to child marriage, the things that drive girls out of education, it's all connected to women's inability to really own their economic lives, because they don't have those resources. That means they don't make decisions. That means they're not in a position to really control the outcomes. So I think, you know, this idea that the little market has, which is really, for me, beautiful in its simplicity, is that we want to put money in the hands of women, and we trust them to make the right decisions for themselves, their families, and their communities. And I think, you know, our proof of concept has been really in what we've seen happening in this country during the pandemic, that the Biden administration really pushing money directly into the hands of people who really need it without strings attached. So these are not programs. This is not health. This is not sort of the SNAP benefits. You know, all of these are important programs, but just giving families money that they can decide what they need to spend it on has really made a huge difference. I mean, we're seeing dramatic and record levels of poverty amongst children, particularly decreasing. And I think that's what the little market has been trying to do in big and small ways right from the beginning. And it's a powerful intervention, I think. And it's also critically needed, because we know that the epidemic is having a gendered impact. It's pulling women out of jobs. It's pushing women back into precarious, unsafe, low-paid employment, you know, undignified work, if you want.
Hannah, is there anything you want to add to that? There's no pressure if not. That was quite a robust answer.
No, like I said, Liesl always says everything so eloquently. I think it's really, it's cool because, you know, when Lauren had come to lots of Human Rights Watch dinners with me and learned about the work they were doing and understood this concept of what are human rights, you know, these basic rights that everybody is entitled to, and yet so few people have globally. And, you know, we were inspired by that to start the little market, and it's really so incredible to be able to come full circle, to have someone who was such a leader in the women's rights movement now part of our team to help quantify and articulate the work we're doing. And I think it's a good example of what we were speaking about earlier, which is that, you know, so many different organizations or companies you can get inspired by someone doing really complicated work and figure out your own unique way to give back and your own unique way to take what inspired you and make it a part of your everyday work. And I feel like that's what we were able to do at the little market. And it's just that much more powerful to have someone like Liesl on our team.
So it sounds like you're defining success as sort of this number of working dignified hours. Is there another thing that you're using to help gauge that, or when I say that, I mean success?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a numbers person, so I can't help but always look at sales. So yes, of course, at the end of the day, it is about how many people we're helping. And like I talked about, making it sustainable. So knowing that if we order 1,000 candles this week, that we're going to be able to come back and do that, the following season and have that number grow. That's really important, because that's what the sustainability is all about. If we come in and we place a one-time big order but can't come back, then we're not doing what we set out to do. But of course, like I said, being a numbers person, we're very fortunate that the Little Market has grown in sales year over year. COVID was actually our best year to date. We're set to exceed that this year. I think that shopping patterns have changed a lot since 2020, essentially. I think people understand that we are global citizens. We're all part of a global community. And when we choose to buy eco-friendly, fair trade products, it helps everybody, including the planet. And I think people understand that ripple effect. I think COVID really made people aware of how connected we all are, and how the choices we make every day impact not only our neighbors, but people around the globe. And so Lauren and I are excited to see that, that conscious consumerism is becoming more and more popular, and people understand the power in their purchase.
So I'm curious what you're seeing. Is there a shift in the things that people are buying, or is there a shift in the quantity? I'm curious what you're kind of seeing on your side.
Yeah, I mean, at the beginning of lockdown, when everybody was home, it was a lot of home decor. I think people wanted to invest in their homes and make it a place. Everyone knew they'd be there for a while, so start to purchase items they'd have on their wish list. But now that everyone's kind of settled in and is ready to go back out, it's kind of shifted towards gifts. Which is great, because we've always wanted to be kind of a go-to gifting destination for anyone who cares about buying gifts that give back, either for themselves or their recipient. So that's kind of where we go back and forth. It's a little hard for us because so many of the artisan groups we work with have been disproportionately impacted by COVID. We, like Liesl mentioned, we really seek out groups in the most vulnerable communities, but that means that there's language barriers, there's so many obstacles in a normal year. So you add on a pandemic, and it means that, the artisans we're working with have been through way more lockdowns than we have. They're not able to get the materials they need to make the products. We've had many artisan groups be able to complete products, but not be able to ship them out. So it means that we have huge supply chain issues. And we imagine that will be there for the unforeseeable future. But again, back to our unique model, like, we're all about being flexible with that and doing what we can to support artisans. So even at the beginning of COVID, when some of our partners had other vendors cancel orders and say, I know you've made the product, but we're not going to buy it. That's where we step in and say, okay, well, we know we can sell it. Or even if this is a new product, we'll give it a try, because you've already put in the labor. You should be paid for this work. And that's, again, kind of what sets us apart. And we're fortunate to have customers that care about that and want to support that. So when a new product comes, even it might, in general, our customers are always so excited and so supportive.
Yeah, I think so. There's a lot there where you just said to sort of go through. And one of those things I think is the communication. And I'm really curious. So I had a conversation last week with someone who is the senior director over at the Food for Good Foundation, and they were talking a bit about, they provide food through the PepsiCo Foundation to children who don't have access to meals outside of school lunches. And they were talking, like, some of their early findings that really they redefined their idea of poverty and less from this focus on what you don't have to the emotional side of it, being the side of embarrassment, the side of how do we connect this, but in a way that, again, going back to this idea of dignity. So I'm curious how you work with that idea. So you're going into, other cultures, other countries, and talking with people and trying to help, create a service in some ways that provides economic benefit to them. But I'm curious to how you do that in a way that's still empathetic, considerate of the circumstance, without necessarily like oversimplifying, right? I mean, because it's difficult, and really put some of those human emotions and perspectives in the forefront.
And then I'll let Liesl take that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for us, we work really hard to create a partnership with groups. We don't see ourselves as service providers. We don't see ourselves as in fact, we work really hard to kind of avoid the idea that we are helping people. So in terms of, for example, the product design and development phase, our team works really closely with the artisans. So they really design the products around the authentic product that the artisan group is making. We are very careful to preserve traditional techniques. So we really try to understand, how has this product come apart? What kind of techniques are being used? So we, I think, have worked really hard to create a collaborative partnership with artisans for a start. And I think we've been very intentional and mindful about not replicating some of those very problematic Western models of service and support in non-Western context. So, you see sort of often a program that really meets the needs of the service provider rather than the so-called beneficiaries. So we've paid a lot of attention to kind of just building relationships. We get feedback from our partners. They tell us what they want to do, because I think our goal is not just to sort of address poverty on an individual basis, but we really want to build these long-term relationships because we think that's going to create sustainable change in the communities we work in. So I think that we've thought a lot about what it takes to invest in these relationships. We have, for example, someone in our team whose job it is just to ensure that we are regularly, consistently, robustly, and respectfully communicating with artisans. That's all she does, is she facilitates that communication, and it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. We have people in our product development team who really have long, deep relationships with artisans. So when we're thinking about products, when we're designing products, they're giving us feedback. We are really understanding what works for them and so on. So I think that we really see this as a partnership and a collaboration. It's not kind of we're going in there to help people. It's a mutually beneficial relationship. You're making products. We want to sell them. How do we do this in a way that makes sense for you, what you're doing, and that respects your human rights in that process?
And there's definitely also, I think, like a technology gap, between I'm sure some of the areas and parts of the world you're working with may not have, access to banking or access to internet. So I'm sure that complicates things a lot for you all. And I'm sure that's part of the supply chain issues that you mentioned a little bit earlier. But I'm curious to how that works on the financial side and how you're able to help sort of bridge that gap and give access to the capital. Are you finding workarounds, or I'm just curious to how you all are tackling that problem?
Do you want to talk about the business side, Hannah? Then I could jump in with sort of some of the ways that we're thinking about it that we think continues to promote this idea of dignified work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think back to who we're looking to partner with, it's exactly the artisans who are going to struggle with technology and really wouldn't have other ways to get their product out there. And so our team is incredibly flexible in terms of the way we communicate. Our artisan team will do Skype, WhatsApp, you name it, at sometimes all hours of the night to get a product to the finish line. But even artisan groups who have email, we have one of the groups we work with that we ordered. It's one of the groups we order the most from for the entire artisan group, which they have over 200 women dedicated to just making products for us. There's one email address. So even if technology is up and running, there's things like that can still make communication challenging because we're not actually sure which member of the team received that email. So that's just a simple example of like the types of extra communication challenges we might have, but those are what we're signing up for, and those are what we're hoping to help do trainings on to help artisan groups improve their efficiency too and be able to scale.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a couple of principles I think that really guide this for us. One is that we pay up front. We don't pay on consignment. And I think that's really important in terms of these groups being able to become financially more sustainable. We take on the risk. So we'll order the products, we'll pay for it, and then it's up to us if we can sell them. The other thing that we do is that we've invested in groups where we've had longer relationship. We've helped groups buy specific specialized pieces of machinery. We have helped groups, as Hannah says, in COVID, we jumped in and bought orders where other organizations had canceled. We accepted orders that were long past the deadline and so on. So I think, we're very agile and we're very flexible in trying to understand what works for this group. So, just recently we've brought a laser printer for a group that we work with in Bangladesh. And they're going to use this obviously to do wood carving on our products. But obviously, we hope that it will help them get business and improve their sales for other groups that they're working with. So, we have a way of kind of trying to assess, is this helpful? Because we always want to do things that are going to help make the groups more sustainable, more independent, and not more reliant on us. The other thing that I think we try really hard to do is to work with them around some of the biggest challenges. So it is wickedly expensive to ship small amounts of things from some of the countries we work with. That's a really huge barrier for us. So working with the groups to try to figure out how we can make that more cost effective. We try to bundle shipping. We try to figure out whether there are other groups where they can share a container. But, we are always trying to investigate what the biggest barriers to them, because obviously, we want to be able to bring the goods in for us, but we understand that if they're able to ship more effectively to the US, it opens up huge opportunities for them. So I think we're constantly looking at those barriers in very concrete, practical ways, and then figuring out how we can work with the groups to solve problems for them in a way that increases their independence and enhances their access to e-commerce and to a global market. So, for example, we also try to give groups feedback on how their products are doing. So when we check in with them, we let them know, this has worked really well. It seems like there's a huge market for this product. This is selling really well. We think the tweak that we made to this design has helped. So, giving them feedback and data that they can then decide, this helps us to understand how to position ourselves. This helps us to understand better who our likely customers are.
Yeah,
we're constantly figuring out ways to help them understand what's happening with their products here that can help them build up a bigger market for themselves.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting business model, and I like how you're addressing some of these factors like paying up front and providing the feedback. And you've had success. You've opened up a brick and mortar. You've grown. You have a pretty large team now, I would say. I read somewhere around 30 people or over 30 people. I'm not sure if that's still the case or not.
Bit more than
almost 40. Well, congrats. I mean, that's amazing. No, I'm curious how you've grown the business. Like I think a lot of entrepreneurs or people who are in social enterprise are very curious to how do you grow a business and scale something like this? Do you plan on opening other brick and mortar shops in other parts of the U.S. or the world, or are you trying to grow your online footprint through a lot of the ambassador and celebrity aspect? Or I'm throwing out a lot of random questions all tied into this one, I know, but I was just trying to get into the meat of how you're doing it.
Yeah, I mean, for growth, we're always looking at kind of diversifying portfolio, meaning we're looking to make sure we're doing as many different things well as possible, which is always challenging. But as far as future retail, brick and mortar is very challenging, especially in a pandemic environment. And one of our biggest challenges with brick and mortar, as far as expanding nationally, is that our shipping prices are so high. Our margins are already much smaller than local businesses. And so we wouldn't at this point be able to ship product to New York and then sell it. We would lose the margin. So for right now, we store all of our product in Orange County in our warehouse and fulfillment center, and then it's driven up to LA, where our current flagship store is.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how we're able to do that. But until, kind of like Liesl said, we're able to really scale to a point where shipping costs can come down, then it'll make things like that more challenging. And when we are looking at costs and costs coming down, we don't negotiate with the artisans and the labor prices.
Mm-hmm.
The only places for us that costs can come down is on shipping and cost of materials. So the larger the orders we're able to buy, then you can get a better price break on some of the materials, and shipping too. But as far as scale, it's such a big beast, because to get shipping breaks with scale, it means we have to order way more units, which means we need to have a bigger warehouse, which it all
compound down the road.
Yeah. It's a lot to keep track of. And the other hard thing is, because our items are handmade and we're working with individuals where we don't always know when the shipping's going to come, it means that we could get often we end up getting two massive orders at the exact same time. So our warehouse team has been so strategic with learning how to kind of Tetris and store things to the best of our ability, but it takes a lot of logistics and planning to get there. And then as far as brand awareness, we're very lucky because we are a nonprofit, and we have so many incredible women in our lives that want to support the work we're doing in order to support more women locally, nationally, and globally. So we've had the support of some incredible, activists, tastemakers, celebrities, change makers, who have really helped to amplify the message. Because marketing right now is a challenging thing to do. There's, information overload. Everyone's been marketed to all day, every day. So it's really hard to get a message through. And the other thing that's a challenge right now is kind of this concept of greenwashing. That was a term that started kind of in the eco-friendly space, where any brand could come in and say, this is sustainable, this is eco-friendly, and nobody's monitoring that kind of term or that kind of claim. And we're seeing that more and more in the artisan-made space or the sustainability space. And the more big brands use those terms and use them loosely without anybody monitoring how they're being used, it makes it harder for a consumer to understand the impact that the little market's making, and what it means to pay fair trade, and what it means to actually do a deep dive to make sure that the materials being used are locally sourced using natural dyes, and what all of those different things mean and how they really impact the people that are making the items and and the planet. We've often used the example when talking about fair trade that it's like buying organic. It's not just about what you're putting into your body, because yes, because buying organic is expensive, and so that is a barrier. But if you look at it as an investment for not only your family and you and your body, but also knowing that organic farming is better for the planet and significantly better for the farmers, then that might be an investment someone's willing to make. It's like all the chemicals that are used on crops, not only do they end up in the body of the person who's eating the food, but they are toxic to the farm workers. And buying fair trade is actually very similar to that. Using toxic dyes creates pollution that can destroy communities, can destroy their water sources. And so much of this stuff we know from Human Rights Watch and work that they've done, but it's really hard for consumers to understand what a big change you're making when you are choosing to invest in the products you're putting in your house and invest in the people who are making them and ensure that everything's done with them in mind.
Yeah, I think sustainable is one of those things that gets thrown around a lot, and it doesn't consider like the human side of it, as far as like, again, going back to living wage, working wages. And, as someone who has had a variety of jobs in his life before doing what I'm doing now, and have worked in restaurants for, I think my first restaurant paycheck, I was getting paid $3.50 an hour before tips. And I was even in the kitchen, so I wasn't working on tips. And it's, to me, it's not a business model if you're relying on cheap labor. If your system requires on people to have 4 other jobs just to survive, it's not a sustainable business model. And at least it looks like you want to jump in here.
I think that's really, when you asked us about sort of how do we want to grow, I think one of the goals for us in terms of growth is also getting better at telling those stories, because we have a very robust internal vetting process so that we make sure that there is no exploitation or abuse in the supply chain and in the production of the products. So we really expend a lot of energy and time of our artisan team in assessing that we are working with groups where there is no kind of human rights violations, no fair trade abuses, etc., in those production and supply chains.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so I think we want to get better at telling those stories, because I think, we've seen some conversation in the fashion industry. I think people are beginning to understand that if you're paying $5 for a t-shirt,
Mm-hmm.
you have to begin to ask about, what kind of abuses allow, a big brand to sell a $5 t-shirt. And I think that we want to get better at telling those stories, at helping people understand, because I think there's a market and an appetite for that.
I agree.
I think, as you were saying, in the restaurant business, people are starting to say, well, if I'm paying this amount for food, what does it mean in terms of the working conditions for the people that I can't see in the kitchen who are preparing the food, washing plates? And I think that people understand that the satisfying thing about a $5 plate of food is no longer what it used to be, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what we're wanting to do is to use the huge amount of data and also the qualitative stories we have.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked a lot to the artisans about how working with us has really shifted and changed things for them. So one of our goals is to really get better at telling those stories and help people connect those dots. Because if you're buying something for $5, you've got to be asking yourself some questions about how it got there and how it was able to be, how you were able to buy it so cheaply. And I think we can guarantee that there's nothing good about in that story for the people who made, transported, unpacked, and packaged those goods.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think we're getting really close to time here, and I want to thank both of you for sharing a lot of your wealth of knowledge on these topics, because it's as you just pointed out, it's really not something that's in the public narrative. It's just starting to come out more and more, and I think it's because it's becoming a lot more local to our own cities. It's something that we're hearing our friends and family saying it. We're seeing it at our places we were working, which I think is really helping bring things to light. But with that, one of the things I always like to do and is ask people, we have hindsight's great, right? It's 2020, as they say. So looking back, what's something you'd give like your younger version of yourself advice? It could be career, it could be focus on within the nonprofit world, maybe a learning you've had, and either one of you can start. I know I see you both deep in thought, which I love, and there's no rush to answer. We can always cut out the dead air.
That's a good. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Liesl.
No, I was going to say that's a great question. Go ahead, Hannah.
I think a lot of people think that they have to, in order to pursue their dream, they need to only focus on that. And I think that that's a big mistake. I think that the busier you can be and the more learnings you can have, especially while you're paid or interning or different job experience, as long as they're all in a space you're passionate about, all of those different experiences can teach you something that you don't even realize you're learning until you are in the next phase of your career. And going back to, the time I spent volunteering with Human Rights Watch, there was so much I learned, even when it was related to event planning, that has now helped me plan for product sales and purchases. I think, similarly, I'm sure your restaurant experience taught you a lot, even if it taught you that, you now want to advocate for those who are not making enough money. That's an incredibly important experience to have. And it also means that every time you order from a restaurant, you're probably going to tip better and you're probably going to treat the service team better because you've been in their shoes. And I think so often when people feel like they're in the grind or not at the place in their career that they want to be, they, lose hope or get discouraged. But I think if you kind of keep your eye on the prize and take every learning opportunity and experience as a moment to grow, I think that there's a lot to be said for that.
For me, I think it's about working in places that connect with your own values, because I think for me, where I have found a lot of satisfaction is in being able to feel that the good that I'm trying to do out in the world is replicated by the good that we're trying to do with the team that we work for. Mm-hmm. Because I think, for us, we really have made it a sort of value that we want to treat our own staff with the same kind of dignity. We define dignified hours differently for our team than we would for artisans, but it is the thread that connects everything. And, working in a place where you think you might be doing good in the world, but where your own experience is not great, if there's a lack of respect for you, if there are not opportunities to grow, if your expertise is not valued, if your lived experience is not valued, then no matter how great the work that you are doing out in the world is, it's probably not worth it. And for me, I really reiterate what Hannah said. If you can learn something new in every job you do, that is really valuable. And the older I get, the more I appreciate that. For me, what has been great about working at the Little Market has been learning about things that are completely outside of my comfort zone and wheelhouse: product development, product design, marketing, and I have really found that very, very stimulating to be able to kind of learn something and then think about what that means for the way we're designing the artisan programs, for how we're engaging with them, for the information that we want to share with them. So if you're able to learn in every new job and you're out of your comfort zone, that's probably a really good thing.
I think that's well said, and I completely agree with that. I think that's one of the reasons why I love working in marketing and advertising, is we get to work in so many different businesses, so many different people, and every time we enter a new brand, there's this level of discovery and learning that happens, whether it's with product development, how, in your case, similar to your case, supply chain, how things are being made, and I think in the end, all these different diverse experiences kind of just help make someone a little bit more well-rounded global citizen who's able to function and can consider people from different perspectives other than like this one that we just grew up with or whatnot. We're able to get outside of ourselves in many ways. Well, I thank both of you for coming on. I really appreciate the time and sharing your insights. And I hope to talk to both of you soon.
Thanks, Jonathan. It was great to be part of this conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us and for your commitment to talking about sustainability and giving back.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much for spending the last hour with us. I hope you are all feeling inspired and have learned something new. Please head on over to the Apple Podcast app and leave a review. See you all next week.